Our speakers are Sabia Kamali, who is the CEO of Sisters Forum and a TV presenter for the Islam channel, and Nahella Ashraf, who is a leading member of Stand Up to Racism in Manchester. So I'm going to pass it over to Sabia.
Thank you. It's a huge privilege and honour to be here today. We might not all be able to stop all forms of injustice in the world, but festivals like these help us develop as activists and organise better to fight against injustice. We might not agree on everything, but we can all agree that we need to be united to fight against all forms of discrimination or racism and be in a position to have an open dialogue for a better society. We can agree that Islamophobia is currently a hidden fear of racism we've allowed to grow amongst ourselves, be workplace, school, streets, and this doesn't come from far right first, it comes from top-down government first, from racist policies which allowed far rights to grow. So just a raise of hands, how many people in this room are aware of Islamophobia? And how many of you have been a victim of Islamophobia? So let me start today off with my experience of Islamophobia, as it doesn't discriminate. When you wear the hijab, you are a target. I was attacked twice. The first time I remember, winter evening, I was at New Cross station waiting for my train. A drunk guy smashed his bottle on my arm and said, "Go back to your country, you." So 2002, after 9/11, the second time was on my way to work. And early morning, just randomly, I got punched in my face at Plaistow Station, 2017, and I was called a terrorist. I've been asking myself questions. Why me? What did I do? Did I instigate them? Do they really think I'm a jihadi bride, bank robber, or a terrorist? Considering last 23 years, 3 United States of America's presidents have invaded 9 Islamic countries, murdered 11 million Muslims, but people like me are the terrorists. It's women like me that had to face the brunt of the anger of the Western world, not them. I personally believe the impact of foreign policies, media, political campaign, niqab ban, Sharia law, exaggerated of terror threats, and trying to portray Islam as incompatible to British culture in a number of ways has led to people believing that Muslims as a population cannot be British and Muslim. Half of the population in British hold Muslim responsible for terrorism act. So if some of your perception about me were negative, I don't really blame you. That's just how the media has been portraying people who look like me. One study found that 80% of news coverage about Islam and Muslim is negative. So allow me to introduce who I am. I'm a mom, a coffee lover, only black. On the side, I'm a journalist and an activist. When I wore the hijab, I was in second year of university. My Muslim friends thought it was a fashion statement. My non-Muslim friends thought it was a political statement. Some even thought I got married. She must be oppressed. Poor her, she had really nice hair. Well, my parents' fear was, has our daughter become an extremist? The real reason was I was going through an identity crisis. I wanted to know my purpose in life. I wanted to feel connected. And the first attack, my parents wanted me to take off my hijab. I said no. So if wearing a hijab makes me radical, it didn't happen at the mosque or in my basement. For me, it happened at Goldsmith University in a sociology lecture where we were taught Durkheim theory on existence. Contradiction was he didn't believe in God, but helped me find mine. Unfortunately, a couple of months after wearing the hijab, 9/11 happened, and that changed everything for Muslims in the West. It made people like me a foreigner, a terrorist in my own country. Not only was my religion hijacked by a few extremists who had very little to do with Islam, in a flash somebody else's action was my fault. Our life has changed. Islamophobia went mainstream after the War on Terror, 2001. Attack was on the rise. Foreign policy gave birth to Islamophobia and everyday racism minorities face and tore our worlds apart. We are constantly challenged at workplace, schools, and on the street. That's how it all started for us. Since that day till today, we face all sorts of hate crimes, be the violence against Muslims in India, concentration camp in China, situation in Sudan, ethnic cleansing in Rohingya, or the recent incident in Manchester of Shukri Abidi, a 13-year-old refugee girl from Somalia who was constantly bullied at school and then drowned in a river by kids in her school. The family received no support from the police and the local authority, hence local councillor Rab Nawaz Akbar retweeted, and I quote, "No doubt emotions are running high after the tragic loss of this young life, and I can also understand the hurt, anger, and the sense of possible injustice But I think a protest outside the school straight after the funeral is not the way forward. Why refugees' life doesn't matter, or are we just immune to racism? Islamophobia is not an accidental or random fear. It has been created through the media. It's allowed others to hate and justify attack on Muslim women, including senior Tory leaders such as Boris's comment on Muslim women wearing a niqab as a letterbox, Jack Straw, who felt uncomfortable with a woman wearing a niqab. As he couldn't see her face, he wanted her to remove her veil. David Cameron saying that Muslim women need to learn English, or more recently the witch hunt against Shamima Begum, a schoolgirl groomed at 15, with a highlight on the media not as the innocent brainwashed victim, but as the jihadi bride that showed no remorse. Perfect cover-up for the failure of Tory government. Brexit was shoved under the carpet. Shamima was demonised for leaving Britain to join ISIS. Where did ISIS come from, and why did it become attractive to a very small number of British Muslims? I don't think you can understand the rise of ISIS and Muslim terrorism without seeing the emerge from the wreck of countries like Iraq. Responsibility lies with American and British government. People don't get radicalized in the mosque. The only place people get radicalized is on the internet, and the only problem mosques create is they take up too much parking space. The first thing happens when people get radicalized is they cut themselves off their family and community, so the terrorists can influence as the true Muslims and the rest of us as sellouts. Young girls like Shamima want to raise their anger and injustice in the world, and yes, the mosque and the community has failed them, and these are the target groups like ISIS who give them the solution to their problem. We should all condemn ISIS, no doubt. They don't represent Muslim or Islam, but we are going to give into their narrative if we see them as a representative of 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. This will only tarnish my peaceful religion. Some of my Muslim friends distance themselves as they didn't want to be seen as ISIS supporters, and some said she should be punished. My non-Muslim friends took a principled stance in defending Shamima's human rights. No one is justifying her action, but we all believe she should have been given a fair trial, brought back to Britain, which was her home. Revoking her citizenship without an investigation or a trial is no solution. One of the cases that stands out the most for me from Sisters Forum is, my mum has mobility issues, walks with a crutch. She was walking slowly. One day she was walking to the supermarket and a van pulled over and 3 men got out and they urinated on her. I get it that people were angry at the terrorists. Guess what? So was I. Emotions are still raw, understandably. But did I or women like myself deserve these attacks? Do we deserve to live in fear? But till today, what I don't understand and what you don't see or hear much in the media is the effect that these hate crimes have on women. Nor does it only strip off confidence, it leads to mental health, and many still live in fear. It could be me next. Islamophobia has allowed it to become normalized within our society, even socially accepted. The attack on hijab wearing women in the street, the bomb threats made to place of worship, the punish a Muslim a day has left us feeling unsafe to go about our daily lives. Islamophobia, hate crime is a growing problem. Recent statistics highlight how attacks on Muslims has seen the highest increase. Nevertheless, how hate crime is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the underlying cause, which remains hidden from sight. While we can tackle the overtly manifestation of Islamophobia, the form of hate crime, we are less conscious and less clued on about tackling that which lies beneath the waterline. Muslim and Islam have been demonized by society and the media. Attack on Muslim women is on the rise. I dread anything happening anywhere in the world, as Muslim women in the UK will be held responsible and will be the victim of another attack. After New Zealand incidents, Islamophobia increased by 600%, according to independent newspaper. Statistics released by the Home Office show that half of religiously motivated attack in 2017 to 2018 was directed at Muslims. According to the police record, a total of 94,098 hate crime offences took place, and this does not attack does not include the crimes that wasn't reported due to language barrier and any other reasons.
Okay, thank you, Sabia. Our next speaker will be Nahella.
Thanks, everybody, and I'm just going to stand. I want to start by saying that since coming into power, the Tories have declared war on Muslims, immigrants, refugees and black people in general. And Muslims, and in particular Muslim women, have been found on the front line of that attack. Right now, Muslim women are being portrayed as one of two things. Either we're seen as a threat to British values and the British way of life just because of the way we dress. Somehow the fact that I choose to wear this cloth over my head is a reflection of the fact that I don't want to be integrated and I denounce British values. And let's start by saying this. Their idea of what British values are, I think, are very different from those that we all share in this room today. So on one hand, I'm a threat and I denounce British values. On the other hand, apparently I'm oppressed and I need to be saved both from myself and apparently the men in my life. So, you know, while I need to be protected and saved from these men, it's other men telling me that they need to do this for me on my behalf. David Cameron wanted to protect women and in particular their rights, and when he was in power, talked about how we must force Muslim women to speak English, to learn to speak English, as if somehow that we don't speak English, and that, you know. And he did this at the same time, let's not forget, when he was cutting all funding to ESOL classes. But he was going to force us because somehow that was going to solve the problems within the Muslim community. And he also pointed out at the time, actually, that one of the reasons that they wanted, his argument for going or attempting in Parliament to get a vote to okay the idea of bombing in Syria was that actually he needed to free Muslim women in Syria from ISIS. And these, you know, were always used as a tool for the ruling class. We've had lots of examples of this over the years. And those at the top have always claimed that their wars are always about helping women. Who can forget the case of Blair and Bush when they took us into the war in Iraq, where they argued that actually it was to save Muslim women in Afghanistan from the Taliban. They even went as far as bringing out their wives, wasn't it Sherry Blair and they rolled them out and said, you know, these sisters, they're out defending this war in Afghanistan because somehow it's going to free the women in Afghanistan. As if the women in Afghanistan have anything in common with these women that are out pushing a war. They have nothing in common with these women. At the same time, this idea that somehow you go to war and you're only going to kill the bad guys. And these women that need saving from these bad guys are going to be left behind and they're going to be saved and they're going to welcome the oppressor. And look how that went. You know, let's be quite honest, it was never about saving the women. And, you know, I know they think we've got smart bombs, but I don't think they're that smart, really. But I think for us as revolutionists, the important thing to understand is that the ruling class are never going to be the ones that fight Islamophobia or the sexism that we have to deal with. And I think it's really important to say this. The attack on Muslim women, and it is an attack on Muslim women, is a combination of Islamophobia and sexism. I think there are people that see us as an easy target because of our gender. And it is always a guy, it's always a man that stops us in the street, that tries to pull our hijab, that tries to spit in our face, and all the rest of it. So yes, I would say that you know, the equalities legislation that we're seeing do go towards helping fight racism. But let's be quite honest, that equalities legislation that we see has been pushed from the bottom up. It isn't the Tory minister that introduced those acts. It was because of working class people fighting in the streets of Britain that meant we got some kind of you know, legislation that was helping us. But you know, that on its own isn't enough. We have a situation today where women, you know, are still not getting the same pay and rights in the workplace that our male colleagues have. But I also want to say this, only this year we've seen a 500% increase in attacks on Muslims, and in particular against Muslim women. And those attacks, that number of 500%, is before we saw the vote against, you know, to leave the EU. That was prior to that. That was as a result, I think, just after the arena attacks in Manchester. So 500% increase. And it's also really important to say that that number in itself is quite shocking. But actually, I think the numbers are far worse because that's only a reflection of what we're hearing. In many cases, people don't report these attacks. I myself was attacked, and in reality, I don't think I would have reported that attack if I wasn't surrounded by people who actually rang the police on my behalf. Why would I have ever reported it? Nothing ever got done. It took them 3 months to download the CCTV footage of that attack and circulate the picture of the man that attacked me. So why would we go to all that trouble? And it is a lot of trouble because you spend hours having to repeat yourself. And actually, that's what happened to me. It took 2 hours of them interviewing me. And they kept asking me how did I know it was because I was Muslim? How did I know it was a hate crime? So why would we report these incidents? I think, you know, and I did say, you know, it's this idea that we are an easy target, and I think it is because of the stereotypes that the media and you know, people that should know better, politicians, mainstream politicians, that portray about Muslim women that make us our easy target. So when Cameron made those remarks about Muslim women somehow, was it we're so supposedly submissive? He's clearly not met us two on this platform today. But that was what was responsible, I think, for the fact that we are an easy target. But I do want to say this as well. It's absolutely clear for us as revolutionists that we recognise the fact that people aren't born racist or sexist. It's an actual reflection of the society we live in. It's a ruling class whipping up through the various speeches, so whether it's May or before that, May, but Boris Johnson most recently, but we've had other politicians alongside them, but also government policy. If you look at Prevent, that goes towards attacking Muslim people en masse, and that's what helps create the climate that we have. And when you talk about the hostile environment, it's not just, we talk about it with regards to the Windrush generation, we talk about the refugees, but actually it's all of us. But I think Muslims are the easiest target within that group. And it is a result of their hostile environment that has created the situation we're seeing. And so that's why I think we're seeing such a rise in Islamophobia. Another reason I think we're seeing a rise in Islamophobia is the fact that it's far easier for them, isn't it, to attack our faith for why there is, I suppose, an increase in radicalisation within the Muslim community. And it shifts the blame from them and what they've done with their foreign policies and what have you. Wasn't it so easy? You talked about the bride that was just dismissed, the jihadi bride. She was 15-year-old when she was groomed on the internet. And that's what it was. She was groomed. She was a victim of these people. But because she was Muslim, she was perceived as a jihadi wife, and therefore there was no sympathy. She had no right to any kind of, fair trial. She was just labelled, and that was what it was. And yeah, interesting enough, when you have non-Muslims that carry out acts of terrorism that actually do result in people being killed, the amount of times you see, i.e. they're a lone wolf, or, but they were this angelic little kid that then grew up. But when it came to her, she was never an angelic little kid. It was never a case that she was a vulnerable kid at the age of 15 that met this individual and ended up travelling aboard. With the same with her child. That baby that she had that was left to die, that was never an angelic little child. It was a Muslim and a future threat, a future terrorist. So, let's be quite honest, the hypocrisy that we're facing here. But also, we have to point responsibility at the press as well. I'm sick to death of the articles that you see in mainstream newspapers, not just a gutter press, that think it's okay to talk about the way that women like myself dress. I said that's an acceptable discourse in society, and it has become acceptable. See, I don't think in society we'd ever talk about any other woman and the way she chooses to dress the way they would do about Muslims. And somehow it sells newspapers. And it was Wasu who said, the Tory minister at the time, he said, it's past the dinner party test. It's okay to have these conversations and in your middle class dinner parties. So we do need to point the finger at where this is coming from. And it's fair to say that the Tories and their friends have no desire to free Muslim women from the sexism that we're having to deal with. And to start with, the implication that Muslim women are the only ones that are oppressed is a joke. There's plenty of women in wider society that still earn a lot less than men, as I said, have no access to affordable childcare, who don't have access to decent affordable childcare, but also then have to deal with, when they do go back to work, the consequence of the fact that they took time off from that, to have a child, and the effect it has on their careers. But also you have to look at where we have fought back. It wasn't so long ago, and you would have heard it actually, the woman who spoke, the UNICEF worker who spoke on the opening rally at Marxism, about how they had to fight for equal pay. These are women that had to take to the streets, and it was black and white women together who had to take to the streets. It wasn't just a case of, we've got this legislation, everyone's equal, the only problem is that Muslim women are oppressed. No, these were women who were working, who were part of unions, who had to actually take to the street and fight for their equal rights to earn the same money as their male colleagues. So let's not take lessons from the ruling class about how they need to save my Muslim sisters and me from racism and sexism that we have to deal with today. And on this point, I think it's really important that whereas we are seeing a rise in Islamophobia, it's not as bad as it is across the rest of Europe. And I know the Tory government would have lots of reasons for this. Somehow it's something to do with the fact that we have British values and all the rest of it, and we drink tea and all that kind of crap. But actually, I think it's there's a real reason why British society today looks very different from across the rest of Europe. And I think one of the reasons is that actually we have had revolutions at the heart of the anti-racist movement who have fought and argued for unity, and unity with people that don't necessarily agree with you on everything. So actually you had a massive anti-war movement here in Britain, and I think at the heart of which you saw Muslim women taking leadership roles. I mean, that's definitely how Sabia and I, we met and how we got involved. And actually that looks very different from other, across Europe. And so what that did is it brought people together in struggle. You learn about each other, you change your ideas. And I think it's such a shame, and you can see the consequence of how that didn't happen. You look at France, where they didn't unite with the Muslim community, and you see what's happened and how it's allowed the left to be far weaker than we are in British society, and actually it's allowed the far right to grow. It is, the actions of coming together, and it is those struggles where we come together and our ideas are changed. And so it's hard for racism within that environment to grow. Even if you come into that movement with some racist ideas, the fact that you're in the movement together, the fact that you're stood shoulder to shoulder, you learn and your ideas shift. I mean, those Glasgow strikers, you can't be racist if you're on a picket line together fighting your boss. That's really important to say. It's those ideas that change something. And you only have to look at other places. Look at Egypt when they had the uprising. There was a time when women couldn't go out into the square in Tahrir Square without the sexual harassment that they had to deal with. But actually, at the height of that uprising, it was women, part of that movement, that really shifted that society, shifted the perception of how you treat a woman and the fact that they're equal in the struggle. And that didn't come from anywhere. Let's be quite honest about this. Some people would say that, it's social media that built what we saw in Egypt. But actually, it was textile workers that went on strike, women workers that helped bring that uprising out. It was the women that actually marched out of the factories first and, marched up to where the men were in their factory and said, "We are here, where are you?" So women led a leadership role in that uprising. And actually today, you see it in Sudan. You have to celebrate. To me, the most important picture of the Sudanese uprising is the picture of the woman, all dressed in white, stood on top of a car, giving a speech to a crowd. I mean, when does that happen? It happened because there's resistance and there's a movement building which has brought people out in the streets. And to have a real revolution, to have a real, movement from the ground, it wouldn't be the case without women being at the forefront of that, because we're half of society. And you see that, and we should celebrate that. And I think that's been really amazing. And it is an amazing example of how we change and how we fight back. And I think right now, one of the other things that we've seen that I think are absolutely pivotal to the fact that we don't have the rise of racism to the extent that we have across Europe is, I think, groups like the LGBT Against Islamophobia. I think that's such an important organisation. It's a tiny organisation, let's be quite honest, but when you're on a demonstration and an anti-racist demonstration and you've got that organisation stood next to you with that banner, it sends messages out. Because let's be quite honest, this Tory government has used supposing the idea that all Muslims are homophobic and therefore you can attack Muslims while defending the LGBT community. But the idea that actually the Tories are going to ever defend the LGBT community is a joke in its own right. So I think, organisations like that are really important. And actually, as a result of that organisation, I think it's really important to say, when we have seen a massive increase in the attacks on the LGBT community. Over in the last few weeks, we've seen a whole number of attacks. And I'm really proud to say that actually people from the Muslim community have stood in solidarity with the LGBT community. And I think that's a reflection of the movement on the ground and the fact that that LGBT Against Islamophobia group exists and shows solidarity, and that solidarity is being returned. And I think that's really important. And I do want to say this, movements like the Anti-Nazi League and UAF have been absolutely pivotal to pushing back racism and fascism on the streets of Britain. But I do also want to say that one of the places we, as Muslim women and as workers, are strongest is when we're in our trade union movement. Let's be very clear. We've had some of the best victories as part of the trade union movement. And one example for me, I think I've always loved, one of many actually, but the one I want to give is, you see, as anti-racist campaigners, and you and I have done this on numerous occasions, we're community activists very often, we lead community campaigns, and we have, campaigned adamantly, for years now, against the Prevent agenda. And it's really important we did that. But actually, I have to say, when the NUT at the time, it was the NU2, it's now the NEU, when the NUT at the time passed that motion against Prevent, that really was pivotal for us, because it meant that workers in their workplace could stand up and speak up against it. And I think that's really important, because I think that then helped other unions pass the same motion and actually stand up against this government. And another example, my most favourite example, is the Grenwick strikes. a group of Asian women who went on strike for over a year. These were women, a couple of who, and at the time it's worth saying, the workplace was so segregated that you had, white workers sitting separately from black workers, and Asian workers. They even earned different. They were on different shifts, and some of the workers tried to organise a trade union, and they were sacked. And a woman walked out with her son, an Asian woman walked out with her son, and she asked people to follow, and they went out on strike. That strike lasted over a year, and during that strike, you had other trade unions come out in solidarity. They were really, I think, at a time when they were struggling to see what to do, and they called a mass mobilisation. Arthur Scargill and the miners came out, and people that had initially would have supported Enoch Powell, who would have marched alongside Enoch Powell, came and defended those workers and stood on the picket line with the striking workers, and it meant that actually they couldn't bus in as scabs. And it actually meant that they won that victory. And it just goes to show how people through struggle change. And I think for us, that's really important. Having hundreds of workers come together, thousands of workers, and stand in solidarity, that is what changes. And that is what smashes racism in society. So I hope these examples give you an idea of where we're coming from and shows the importance of our politics, because it is really important to say this. You see, understanding where racism comes from and how you fight racism is really important. Because there are some people who will say, you know what, we as Muslims need to go over here and fight racism. Or, I've been told it on numerous occasions, as a Muslim woman, I should stop being so angry. Maybe if I wasn't so angry, people might be nicer to me. I've had that. I'm pretty sure that's never going to happen. But or the other thing is, well, if we get the right Muslims in high places, that's going to do it. Well, right now we've got a Home Secretary. Yeah, he's not helping the cause any more than Obama stopped black men from being shot in the streets of the US, let's be quite clear. Or Condoleezza Rice stopped bombings in all these countries. So let's be quiet, it's not about that. It's about recognising that for the ruling class, it is a tool to divide us. When they are pushing austerity, racism is a tool to divide us. And unfortunately today, we as Muslim women are an easy target. And therefore, we have to be very clear on how we fight back together in solidarity, black and white together, to smash the racism.